Hey mamas, you're listening to the Balanced Working Mama podcast, the only podcast teaching you how to balance your work, motherhood, and wellness. I am Dr. Amber Thornton, clinical psychologist and mama wellness consultant. Each week we dive into tips and strategies and much more so that you too can become a balanced working mama. Let's dive in. Hey mamas. Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Working Mama podcast. I hope you are doing well. I'm feeling fairly rested, you all, and I think it is because of the days or the 7 days of rest challenge that we just finished. And so if you all have been following along on Instagram, and I tell y'all all the time, follow us on Instagram, you saw that we did a 7 days of rest challenge. And so it really just required us to really focus on our rest and prioritizing rest and being creative about getting rest, things like that. And so I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about myself in the last 7 days of really just trying to prioritize rest. And I think the one big takeaway for me is that before I became a mother, I think I thought of rest as like this really big all or nothing thing of like, a restful day for me used to be like doing nothing all day, or like, watching Netflix all day, sleeping in till like 10 in the morning. But clearly my life is not set up like that anymore. It's really hard to find the day where I do nothing all day because I have so many large responsibilities just in terms of being a parent to two little babies, having a job, having a business. I have things to do. All the while my child is crying upstairs. See, responsibilities. And so rest is something that I have to absolutely prioritize because all these other things often feel urgent enough to lead me to believe that rest is less important. But rest is always more important, but also that I can get creative about how I receive rest, right? So for instance, one big thing that I did within my business to help me prioritize rest more is I delegated more tasks to my virtual assistant. And so she and I had a meeting a week or so ago where I walked her through all these new responsibilities that she would now take on. And, sometimes we don't even think about things like that as helping us to prioritize rest more, but it does. Delegating and collaborating more with the people around you allows you to have more time that you can then use to prioritize rest. And so I'm excited for the coming weeks when I'm no longer doing these tasks and my VA can do them and I can just relax my brain. Or that's another big thing that I learned about myself is that a lot of the times I'm not necessarily doing a lot of like physical activity in terms of doing things. Like I could just be sitting there, but my brain is always going. So for me, prioritizing rest meant having more moments where my brain is just calm, where I'm not actively thinking about producing something or um, getting something done, like just letting my brain rest. And so I think I used to assume like, oh, well, I'm resting because I'm on the couch. But all the while I'm on the couch creating a whole program about something that I could do in the future. That's not rest. So I've really challenged myself to um, be more mindful of like rest being moments where my brain is inactive, when my brain is just chilling, you know what I'm saying? So that's something I learned about myself and I'm trying to prioritize more. But either way, I hope that you all learned a lot about the 7 days of rest. I enjoyed it so much. I think I want to do it again. And so stay tuned. Follow us on Instagram. Make sure that you're on the email newsletter so that you can be in the know about a lot of these things, but I feel good, you all. I'm excited to get into a new week. So let's get into today's episode. Today on the podcast, we are talking to Emily Siegel, and she's going to be talking to us about authentically connecting with other mamas. This is so important because, again, I don't know about you all, but I have struggled to make new friends in motherhood. And I know that so many of y'all have experiences because we have talked about it, how hard it is to connect with other women and other mothers as you become an adult, but especially as you become a mom. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I hope you all enjoy this episode, and let's get into it. Hey mama, Balanced Working Mama is growing. I want to make sure that you stay connected and up to date with everything happening over here. So you don't miss any of the good stuff, head over to balancedworkingmama.com, sign up for the newsletter. You'll always be the first to learn of any new podcast episodes, events, programs, and you'll get a hello from me every now and then. So sign up today, mama, because I want to connect with you soon. Okay, so hello, mamas. We have a very special guest today. I think you all are going to like this episode because it is very unique, but also so needed. Because I know that I've talked about this topic with so many of the mamas that I've worked with, but I actually have someone now who can like really talk to us about the ins and outs because she's like the expert in this. So, Emily, please introduce yourself. Tell us why you're here and a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. So my name's Emily. I live outside of Dallas with my husband and my two boys who are 7 and 4. And I work in EdTech during the day. And then at night, I do what really lights me up, which is I mentor moms around building the circle of friends that they crave. Because I just don't think we were meant to mom alone. And I just want to see us all having like the villages that were promised, but don't just happen, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love that. I really do. Um, for so many reasons. Like this resonates with me personally because I
Mhm.
think as someone who is an introvert, but then also like a little socially anxious, but like
Yeah.
just kind of awkward in general, it's just hard to
Yeah.
it's
It
hard
is.
to connect
Yeah.
with people and I get nervous and then I'm like, oh, but
Yeah.
it's just so nice to just stay in the house and just don't talk to people. But then you're like, but then I get lonely. So
Mhm.
this is like a very good thing to talk about. But also, I know in Balanced Working Mama, the thing that we always say is that we're so much better together and
Yes.
we need community. And, that's kind of why we started the Empower Wellness program is that, it's useful to work one-on-one with moms and help them, but we can do so much more work when we're working together, like in a group
Mhm.
and with one another. And it's just so much it's more powerful. And I think it all does boil down to the connections that we have. So I'm definitely, I have so many questions for you today, but I guess the first one is, what led you to want to focus on this, or how did this even become a passion for you? Just the topic of like building connections, finding your friends, finding your people, especially in motherhood.
Yeah. Yeah. It started for me actually way before I became a mom
Mhm.
because about 13 years ago, I got married and my husband and I moved to a city where we knew no one. Pretty much we got married. And then 7 months later, we said goodbye to our hometown, all of our friends that we've built, over the course of our life at that point, 2 decades or so. And so we moved to a new city and I had moved around a little bit as a kid. And so I wasn't that worried about making friends. I was like, oh, I know how to do that. That's fine.
Mhm.
But I think what I had underestimated was that making friends in adulthood just looks a little different than it did growing up.
Right.
And I was really thrown with how hard it was. We didn't have a kid, we didn't have a dog. I felt like we didn't have all like the natural ins for like meeting random people.
Yeah.
Um, and so I ended up learning a lot through that first move. We lived there for 5 years and by the end we had a great network, but it definitely
Mhm.
didn't come as easily as I thought it would. Um, and then we ended up moving again, but this
Mhm.
time I had a 4-month old. And again, I was really confident because I was like, okay, well, with our first move, I figured this thing out. Like I cracked the code on how to like make friends as an adult without school, without all the like normal things. But this time I have a kid, so it should be easier because
Mhm,
now I've got like, someone to kind of get me in and,
mhm,
you know, and in some ways it was, I don't want to discount that. I do think children can give us a natural into some connections, but what I didn't know at the time that I soon realized was that, oh, well, the time I have to devote to making new friends looks real different
very.
now that I have a 4-month-old. So, yeah, that's really kind of like what got me interested in like having felt what like cracked the code the first time of just like, okay, how do we do this in adulthood? And then it's like, okay, but now how do I do this as a busy mom with a lot of things on my plate without making myself feel like all I'm doing is going on friend dates left and right?
Mhm,
I had to figure out really how to accelerate authentic connections with
mm,
less time and less capacity. And
mhm,
so my passion here is it just breaks my heart when moms tell me that, oh my gosh, I'm like literally never alone, but I've never felt so lonely, you
mm,
know? And so that's really kind of why I got into this space of like, we need to be talking about this more because the more we talk about it, the more I think we all realize how much all of us are craving these connections because we're often so scared to put ourselves out there because we think we're the only one.
right.
When in reality, the statistics are on your side, unfortunately. So many of us are really craving more.
Absolutely. Oh, I think you just spoke to so much of what I've experienced personally, but then also in the work that I do with moms. It's like
Mm,
so many of us have this belief like, oh, I'm the only one feeling this way. And it keeps us isolated because we're
mhm.
afraid to be judged. We're afraid to be vulnerable. We don't want people to like think we're weird, just all those little things. But we realize, like you said, there's so many of us that are experiencing that same thing and we all want the same things. It's just how do we get over that hurdle of making it happen. But you also spoke to two things. You said time and capacity. That
Mhm.
resonates because as a mom of two very small children, it's just not as much time and not as much
Mhm.
capacity. And I actually personally have had some issue unfortunately with some of my older friends who don't have children, and we kind of had some challenges around, okay, well, what does this mean for our friendship now that you don't have the same time and capacity? And we didn't resolve it well, and it's still
Mhm.
some unresolved things, but that resonates with me too, because it's like, okay, well, what do we do when we don't have as much time and as much capacity? And so my next question for you was around the specific challenges that you see moms face when it comes to like finding their people, or building authentic connections with other people.
Yeah, for moms, time and capacity. So, yes,
Mhm,
that's definitely a big challenge. And I do like to talk about those separately because, like, sure, I could give you a time tracker and you can track your time and you can discover technically you've got like all these pockets of time.
mhm,
But capacity, I really think about as our energy.
exactly.
And like, just because we technically have all these pockets of time, it doesn't mean that that should get devoted to, that shouldn't all go to friendship. There's so many other places in our life that time needs to go and that energy needs to go. And so I really work closely with moms to yes, understand what time pockets they have available, but then to really think about their capacity in terms of their energy and thinking about, okay, realistically, like, do you have the energy to show up well, to meet a new mom or to try to deepen a connection or to just meet an existing friend and maintain an existing relationship? And so, really working to determine what capacity do you have on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and then kind of like putting goals around that. So, you're not like, one, you're not wearing yourself too thin, but
Right.
then two, you're also not beating yourself up over like, well, technically I was free and I didn't do anything. It's like, well, right, you binge watch Netflix and that was really good for your soul in a different way. And so, like, really just, giving mom's perspective around the time and capacity challenge.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and then the other big challenge you've mentioned already a little bit and it's the mind games that we play with ourselves around like, um, what if she's not interested? Or what if I come off too aggressive? Or maybe I'm annoying? Or what if my invitation, I think women do this a little bit more, like, what if my invitation is actually a burden? Because it's like, oh, she's so busy and she's not going to want to say no, but she's, to hurt my feelings, but she actually does want to say no. Oh, like we start making decisions and assumptions for other people. We tell ourselves stories, about how they are perceiving us that are often so not true.
Mhm.
Um, but I also, have empathy for those mind games too, because I know that we all bring some baggage from past friendships.
Mhm.
I always say, like, oh, thanks, middle school. Like, I feel like middle school did such a number on so many of us that we are still like carrying into adulthood, even though so many of us have grown.
Mhm. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I just like had took a memory trip down memory lane of like middle school and like
Mhm.
we used to do all these terrible things.
Right? We're the
Like
worst.
it was terrible. Like I don't know about
Yeah.
you, and this is probably dating myself, but like getting on the phone on three-way and
Mhm.
then like one person's on and the other person's silent. You say all these bad things and then you're like, "Oh, I hear you." It's just terrible.
Right?
All
It's
these-
awful. It's awful. Yeah. I feel like I do, like, side note, coaching with my friends around this in terms of like high school reunions, because
Mhm.
everyone is like, well, they're remembering me as the person from like 10, 20 years ago. And it's like, okay, they've grown too. So hopefully they are coming, assuming you have also grown,
Mhm.
and we can meet again.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
that's a good point too, because I know sometimes, like myself, but then also moms I work with, they're like, people from like high school or like years ago wanting to reconnect, and I just don't get it. But I think you spoke to that, like, well, we've grown, and we forget that maybe they have grown too, or vice
Mhm.
versa, and so we can start again. It does make for a different type of connection. We're not who we used to be in middle and high school, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yes. If we've done life right. Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I like what you're saying too about just giving yourself some grace. Don't guilt yourself for binging the Netflix because you probably needed to do it. Or you had shared a post recently where you gave like 5 easy ways. I think it was like 5 easy ways to connect with someone. And it was
Mhm.
very simple things like send a text, send a gift, comment on a post on social media. Those count. Those are ways to communicate. Those are ways to show that you care. Those are ways to connect or keep something going. And it doesn't always have to be like a very lengthy phone call or, a lunch. It doesn't have to be all of that all the time. Sometimes the smaller, more frequent things do matter. So I like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really kind of like what I love doing with women is that capacity piece, because there are like daily actions that can make you feel connected, even if like technically your calendar that day is all about your career and all about your kids.
Mhm.
Um, and then, being realistic about, well, I still really, get filled up with some face-to-face time too.
Mhm.
And so how can I fit that in maybe to my week or into every 2 weeks? And how often someone's going to need that will look different.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously your season of life, all those things you've got to take into consideration. But I found really giving women that perspective has just been really game changing for them in terms of their confidence level around their friendships and just perspective in general on, oh, I'm actually like doing pretty well, you know?
Nice. I love that. And so I guess the next thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about, I saw that you recently had a podcast episode because of course you have a podcast as well.
Mhm.
And there was a podcast, I believe it was about shifting identities and how that impacts our friendships. And so I wanted you to kind of speak to that a little bit more, just helping us understand what happens when our identities shift and how it impacts our friendships, especially in motherhood.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about this a little bit that our identities, I do think our identities shift incrementally in life as we grow and change and stretch and all those things. And I do think motherhood is one of those like kind of jarring, bigger identity shifters. Like literally one day you are just responsible for yourself. And then the next day you have to keep a human alive nearly constantly. And so I think adding in that new layer into your life, like that often shifts all of your relationships because so much of your time looks different. So much of your identity you're having to wrestle with. Like maybe like just things you care about start to look different when your identity shifts. So as
Mhm.
a new mom, like maybe you don't care about going out to late dinners as you used to. Maybe, in fact, like maybe you don't want to do those ever again, or at least for the next 10 years. Um, or like things that maybe you were like, so invested in your career and now you care just a little less about things that totally used to drive you and motivate you. And that is really jarring because a lot of times those things that really drove you and motivated you, you thought of as your identity. And
Mm,
so when we become moms, we are really wrestling with so much. And I don't know how much we're prepared for that. And I do think like, all relationships like our, spouse or partner relationships, that takes a shift.
yeah.
And so kind of one of the later relationships that we start to like actually think about and reflect on more is those friendships.
Mm,
And like, oh, that's a lot to put on a new mom, you know? Um, and so what I've really seen and heard from the moms that I've worked with is, they feel really guilty, especially if they're like the first one in their friend group to have kids. And now like all the things they used to do with their friends they can't do anymore. And so and maybe they used to be the fun one or the wild one, and so they're having to wrestle with that. um or maybe like all of, there's also the opposite where, you're the last of your friend group to have kids. And so what I've seen be the most helpful here, and I'm so curious to hear more about your experience, but it's being honest with your friends about how things have shifted for you.
mhm,
Because what I do mentor a lot of moms through it, for particularly for that mom who used to be the wild and crazy one, saying to your friends, "Oh my gosh, like I used to be the wild and crazy one, and that was like the role I played in our group, and
mm,
I don't know that I can do that right now, and I'm feeling like maybe you guys won't want to be friends with me anymore."
mm,
If she can verbalize that to them, that's going to be huge because what they're telling themselves when she's not verbalizing that is that, oh, she doesn't have time for us anymore. She's just a mom now. She doesn't care about us. When it's totally the opposite. But because they're not being honest with each other and they're not openly talking about how they're feeling, it, unfortunately, that friendship is headed towards completely going away, and
mhm,
not in a nice way, but in like a resentful, harboring, hurt feelings way
mhm.
that could be avoided with what might feel like a hard conversation at first. But I don't know. I think, we should give our friends some credit when we, aren't coming from a place of blaming them or you don't get me anymore, but more about like, I don't even know that I get myself anymore. Help.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm truthfully, it's really hard to it's hard for other people to understand where we're at if we don't know where we are. And it's okay though. It's part of the process. Like as a new mom and you like you said, with all the things that you are trying to understand about yourself, but also about your children and your family, it makes sense that you don't know who you are at that point or where
Yeah.
like it really does. But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of having a hard conversation. I think that is what should be at the core of friendship is the ability to be vulnerable, and that's
Mhm.
also what's at the center of authentic connections is vulnerability. But so many of us are so bad at it, including myself, because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that trips up a lot of us is that, oh, I have to have a really uncomfortable conversation. What does that mean for my friendship? When really having an uncomfortable conversation could mean so much in terms of deepening your relationship or keeping your friendship, as you were saying. It's really important. I know for me personally, I did have to have a few uncomfortable conversations with a few of my friends when I became a mom, because I was in situations where, of course, I have several friend groups. One of my friend groups, I was the first to have kids, and others of my friend groups, I was the last to have kids. And so it was definitely always an interesting spot of like, okay, my life is changing now. And similar to what you said, the people on the other end, my friends, not understanding that it's not that she doesn't care or that she doesn't have time, it's that things are shifting for her. And that means things are shifting for our friendship. And we just have to talk about it. Um, so it's something I'm working on too, because hard conversations are hard
Mhm.
for
I know
everyone.
they
It
are.
really is. But hopefully if someone is listening to this and if you're going through a similar thing, I think what Emily is kind of showing us and teaching is that these things are really essential for us to really have long lasting, authentic connections. It's so important, especially as moms and as women. We need people. We really do.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. There was another, and so this is a question that just came to me because I just heard myself say long lasting friendships. But I remember you also recently had a post about different types of friends that you need in your
Mm-hmm.
life. And I think one of them was like a same season friend. Um, and so I kind of just wanted to ask you about that. Like, what does that mean? Or just like the different types of friendships? Because I know for me personally, I've realized that, yes, I need mom friends, but I also need friends who are not moms. I also
Mm-hmm.
need friends within my business, like just an hour ago, I was at lunch with a business friend, and we both are entrepreneurs. And it's so nice to just have that type of friend that we can talk about entrepreneurship, or like even work friends. You mentioned that. So if you could speak a little bit more to like the types of friendships and why that is even important for us.
Yeah. Well, I firmly believe there's 5 types of connections, and you just named 4 of them technically.
I was
Um,
to your post.
yeah. Yeah. So same season friends, I think, are so valuable because they are the people that are kind of have similar life circumstances to us and are going through it. And it's just so nice to be able to talk to someone who literally is in the thick of it. I think a lot about the new mom who is trying to figure out how to breastfeed for the first time. And I, of course, so I have a 4 and a 7-year-old, and I, can talk with that new mom about that. But I'm not going to be able to talk with her about it the same way I could have when I was a new mom. And I could have talked with her for 2 to 5 hours about it, where today I can't do that, at that same level and that same, depth and understanding. And so that's what I just love about those same season friends is like they are the ones that can talk with you for an hour about a very acute topic that you all are, working through.
Mhm.
And then I always say different season friends too, because I think it's so nice to like one, if you're taking the mom friend example here, I really love having moms that are ahead of me in
Yeah.
terms of raising kids. I find that so valuable.
Mhm.
But I also really, really love my friends that don't have kids. I just love them so much. And I really go out of my way to tell them that. And they obviously like, ask me questions about my kids because that's a part of my life, but it's just like so nice to not have to talk about my kids too.
Mhm.
And to support someone in like different things that someone might be going through in their life. This is a little selfish, but I've also found, at least when I had really littles, my friends without kids were also just more open to being able to come to me
Mhm.
when I was trapped in my house. And
Yep.
so I find so much value in them.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned your business friends. So I kind of talk about like same interest friends, kind of like those niche things that, we all have interest in that like, I'm trying to think of like something I like to geek out over. Like usually, I mean, if I could find like a Schitt's Creek fan, like I would talk for 2 hours about that and would like get a lot of fulfillment out of that. But not everyone is, going to be into that. Same with podcasting. Like I have podcast friends, as I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
Um, and like my normal friends are like, oh yeah, I think I know how to listen to a podcast, but not normal friends. That's not the right phrase for them. But yeah, those niche friends and then work friends. Like for most of us, we're spending a big chunk of our days at work,
Yeah.
and it's so valuable to use that time
Mhm.
to fill up your connection cup. And so, not always possible, but when possible, I highly recommend it.
You know what? Yeah. So with the work friends, I know that there are some people who believe that we should not invest so much time in work friends because it's kind of like, you're here to do your job and you go home.
Mm-hmm.
But I have really not found that to be the case. Some of my work friends have really become like
Yeah.
my outside work friends, but then also just help me get through the day.
Yep.
Like
Yes.
it just it they my work friends make the day and the work go by so much better. It
Mhm.
really just makes the experience of going to work so much more fulfilling when you get to go and just like like, hey, I got my friend here. it really makes it so much better. So I'm glad that you kind of spoke to that because I do think work friends are very important.
Yeah, and I'll mention a book here too. Shasta Nelson just wrote a book all about the business of friendship.
Mhm.
And she just notes a lot of research that very much supports the idea of there are more pros to having friends at work than cons, significantly more.
Definitely.
And then the last one is neighbors. Now, they may not need to be your best friends, but definitely connections. And the more friendly you can be, the better. Because particularly for moms, when
Mhm.
time and capacity is low, the less barriers in the way to getting together is really helpful. And so people that are within a pretty close distance, of your home, of your work, are pretty critical. So that's what I do a lot of work with moms around when they're feeling like they're lacking in friendship or just feel like something's missing is we specifically look at the different types of connections to get a sense of, is that maybe why you're feeling that way? Or is it more about the depth and, or the
Mhm.
number and those things?
Wow, that is so fascinating. I love that. I really do. So I wanted to ask you because it sounds like you have worked with several moms around these things and like you're so good at this and just the way that you're thinking about it is very enlightening too. And I wanted to ask, do you have like a favorite mama connection success story? Maybe a mom that you've worked with around these things, these topics, and her coming out of it being more successful, feeling confident in her connections. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I know it's hard. It's hard to like pick one. I was working with a few moms in the midst of the pandemic whose kids were going to daycare, but due to COVID, there were just like no happenstance run-ins like at pickup or drop off with some of the other moms, because of just how pickup and drop offs are operating. So one of the things we did was we worked on developing a note that they could send to school with their kids that could then be passed to some of the other kids, who they knew that their kids were friends with
That is so
and
cool.
and kind of like put together a note that shared her cell phone number and suggested that maybe they do a play date at a local park outside where it was um fairly pandemic friendly. And one of them, I just remember this so clearly. So we were messaging back and forth, and she had sent the notes in, and it had been a few days, and she hadn't heard anything. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm so silly. That was so dumb of me." And I'm like, "Hang in there. Like, just think about like when you have something on your to-do list as a busy mom, are you able to get to that immediately? Like, probably not. Like, let's just give it some more time." And then, literally, in a matter of 24 hours of her sending me those messages, three of them texted her, and she had three separate play dates set up for like that next weekend and the weekend after. And one of them she ended up having a really good connection with, and they ended up like taking it to the next level and got the families together and went like boating, a few weekends later. So that was really exciting. And the other mom who was doing that I was working with, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I literally just made my first real mom friend,
Oh,
from that note." So those are like the daycare note ones, particularly during the pandemic, we're just felt so good. And yeah, and for them, I think like, when I ask them, how they're feeling, it's really like that perspective shift that's been the biggest,
mhm.
kind of excitement that came out of our work together because both of them are like, "Oh my gosh, I'm like so much more confident. I'm less in my head when it comes to putting myself out there." Because one, they've had like really good wins
Yeah.
at taking like a very small action,
Mhm.
and got to see that success. And yeah, so that's really probably like the best is when they take the scary action and then on top of it, like come away with so much confidence and moving forward and in how to do that again. Cause
Yeah.
it's really like, I wish I could tell everyone, yeah, just make your, 2 to 3 close friends and you're set. But like, I don't know, they might move. You might move.
Mhm.
Um, something just might shift in general in your identity in some way, and you might have a need for a different type of friend in your life.
Yeah.
And so really like gaining the tools to be able to have the confidence to say, "Oh, I know how to make a friend. Like I've got this,"
Mhm.
is really just so rewarding.
Yeah. Oh, that was so good. Oh my gosh. So, of course, my kids are in daycare, and it just was making me think of my son. He has this friend that he loves. Anytime I ask about how school was, he's like, Anthony. And I'm
Yes.
like, you saw Anthony. Anthony is your favorite
Yeah.
person. And so in my mind, I'm just thinking like, oh, I need to connect with his mom so they can have a play day, but also to connect with her too. Haven't done it yet, but that inspired me. And so I'm going to think more about how do I connect with this woman, because clearly our kids are like BFFs. So like
Mhm.
we need to be connected in some way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I'll share like a quick personal story. I ended up moving my 3-year-old out of his daycare, and I was feeling really like sad about it, honestly, because he had such good friends, and I knew that we were going to lose connection. I just knew it because I didn't actually have the parents' numbers. And so what we did was we went to the dollar store and he picked out like 3 little gifts for like his, closest buddies. And I wrote them a note that just said, "Hey, like wanted to give you the heads up that, he's going to leave the school, but I would like hate for him to, not have that connection."
yeah,
And so I think I invited them to like we had like a kiddie pool in our neighborhood. And so I was like, "Text me if you can make it." And like 2 of the families could, one couldn't. But then I had their number and I was able, to make those connections after. So I am like really proud to say he is actually still friends with those kids. I'm friends with their parents now because I know who they are and we've been able to cultivate that. Um, but yeah, they were like all so excited and also sad that,
yeah,
he was leaving because the same thing was happening in their home. Their kids were coming home talking about my kid. And so, yeah, it's really cool how you can build off of your kids' friendships to
yeah.
create that. And you're hitting that sweet spot with your son because he's 3, right?
He's 2.
2. Oh gosh, yeah.
Funny enough,
Oh yeah, you're hitting that spot.
he's gonna actually phase out to a different school when he turns 3. So
Mm,
now I'm like, okay, I need to do that because he would have been in
yeah.
class for 2 years. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Oh, I'm glad I said that then.
I'm so
Yes,
glad you did.
definitely think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't want him to just completely lose those connections. We can set things up, and of course, I have confidence that he can make new friends. But I want him to keep his friends, his old friends
Hmm.
too, and help
Yeah.
facilitate that. But then also, I get to get some friends out of
Yes.
it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I love
Exactly.
that. So thank you for sharing that, because that definitely resonates with me, and I'm sure that it's going to resonate with some of the other mamas as well. So lastly, and this might be the thing that like really will be helpful so much if this was already helpful, but any tips, maybe give us 3 tips for how a mama might really start to build her people, her village, her people, her social supports, becoming more authentically connected. If someone is listening and they're like, hey, I want to really get better at this today, what three
Yeah.
tips would you give her?
Yeah. So I always recommend with really just some self reflection, actually, as the first step. And really asking yourself, what are you craving most right now? Um, and really digging in. So is it actually more people? Is it more connections? Or is it different types of connections? Are there certain types that you're craving? We talked through some of those. Is it depth with some of the connections you do have? Or is it more time with the connections you have? And it might be a combination of all of those things, but really taking inventory can be so helpful because then you can figure out where to prioritize your limited time to help move the needle forward on the area that's going to actually feel different for you. And because then, like, once you know what you want, you can figure out the how a little bit easier. So, like, okay, I am missing mom friends in my same season. Okay, so where can we find those if you're actually missing them? So we, can think about different spaces where you can find them, which, a great place to start is like, okay, well, where does my kid hang out? Or where would I want, what are types of activities I want to do with my kid? And then, if it's like, oh, I don't know, I actually have a few people I like. They're not like friends yet because I haven't figured out like we just haven't gotten there yet. Well, then it's less about going and meeting new people and more about, okay, how can I create opportunities to spend time with them and deepen this relationship?
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it'll be, like I said, a combination of a few of those things. But at least you're not going to be like spinning your wheels and wondering, like, why is this still not working?
Mhm.
Um, and then, showing up well when you do. And that gets back to that capacity piece of like, okay, Rome is not built in a day. So, like, figuring out what you need is great. And now, like, figuring out what actions are going to get you there and how much capacity do you have for those actions? Like, can you do one thing a week? Do you have time for three things a week? And what would those things look like? Oh, and I talk a lot about double dipping. Anyway, I'm muddying the three tips here. But yes, like figuring out what are you craving most,
Mhm.
then, you're able to then better figure out where to go after it and show up well. And then the last thing I really would like to encourage listeners to think about, and this is hard, but releasing the pressure.
Mhm.
The more you can detach from the outcome
Yeah.
of what happens when you put yourself out there or when you attempt to deepen a connection, more than likely it's going to go well.
True.
It's when we put so much pressure on it that we start to like not be our authentic selves in some way because we're, feeling nervous or we're, trying to look the way they think we should look. Um, and there's just so much less anxiety when we're just like, okay, like this is an opportunity. Maybe this will work. Maybe this won't. Either
Mhm.
way, I'm going to walk away having had a play date with my kid. So I'm going to have had nice time with my kid. We've gotten out of the house. We've released some energy. And oh, like if there's a spark there, awesome. Like then we can keep going. But if not, that was not time wasted, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Love it. Love that. Thank you so much for those tips. Thank you for sharing your insights with us, but also just doing this work because I think, again, I actually have never seen anyone else specifically do this type of work. So it's so needed and so valuable. So I appreciate you for doing it. Lastly, please let us know where mamas can find you if they are interested in your work, if they're interested in following along on Instagram. How can they connect with you?
Yeah. So everything is at theconnectedmomlife.com. Instagram handle at the Connected Mom Life. We've got a Facebook group too. And then if you are one of those people that are just like, "Ugh, I just don't know what to say. I don't know how often to say it or when to say it, all those things. I also have a free guide that will give you basically a roadmap for kind of developing your circle and kind of taking away some of those social anxiety pieces too.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Emily, so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating this space to have this conversation. I think, like you said, so many of us have not had it.
Mhm. Thank you. Hey, Mama, I want to quickly tell you about the Empower Wellness Program. This is a dynamic 6-week group for working mothers who are tired of feeling overwhelmed, fatigued, burdened by mom guilt, but then also just not having enough time for themselves. This program takes all of that and transforms it into more wellness, more time for yourself, better priorities, community with other mothers, but then overall balance in your work, motherhood, and wellness. To learn more about the Empower Wellness Program, head over to balanceworkingmama.com. There you can find when the next program begins, what to expect, but then also how to sign up. Hope to see you in the next group. Hey, Mama. Thank you for listening to the Balanced Working Mama podcast. If you love this podcast, please be sure to rate it and share it with another mama that you know. And don't forget to follow me and Balanced Working Mama on Instagram. I'll talk to you soon.